Alright guys, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about document and website structure. Now, there are many ways to group elements together. You can group elements into separate areas for your website, but why would you want to do that? How does it help? Well, first of all, you can target an entire group of elements at a time in CSS and JavaScript. Secondly, it provides semantics for good accessibility, and it provides a good structure to your document. So the idea is to basically group your elements together. If they perform a similar task or they have a purpose, group them together. Now we've seen a lot of these tags before, the header, nav, main, and footer. These are the major areas of a website. We've seen all this before. Now just to review, the header was the top part of the page that contains a heading and a logo. The navigation contains menu buttons, links, tabs, and tabs that take you to different parts of a web page. Usually it remains the same across all the web pages. Sometimes it can even be inside the header, but some people prefer it after the header instead of inside the header. But it's entirely up to you. You can decide how you want to do it. The main contains the most unique or latest content of a web page. There should be only one main tag on one web page. Finally, we have the footer. It contains copyright and fine print information. It also contains contact details that can also be presented here. Links, related content can also be placed here. So, I drew up a couple of examples on what this can look like. So in the first example here, you can see we have three main sections. We have a header, main, and we have a footer. Inside the header, we have a navigation. But like I said, some people actually prefer the navigation outside the header because they say it improves accessibility. It could be a good point, but it entirely depends on how you want to use your website. So in this second example, you can see the navigation is outside the header, followed by the main and the footer. I'll show you a couple more examples. In this example, you can see the header, main, and footer with the navigation out to the side, which spans the entire full width of the page. In this example, you can see the navigation. You can see the header and footer occupy the full width, with the navigation being in the middle, along with the height of the main. Now, of course, when you write in HTML, this is going to be only one after the other, because that's the way HTML functions. If you want to actually do this separately, if you want to have them aligned to the side, you'd be using CSS, but we're not there yet. But I'm just showing you so that you can get a little idea of how you can structure your website. Now, apart from these main tags, there are a couple of other new tags that I'll show you. We have deeper areas for a website, like the article, the section, the aside, and the form. I'll also show you some layouts that are related to this. Mind you, these are all semantic elements, meaning they all provide some meaning to the articles. Okay, so an article is to group content that's all related to one topic. A quick way to check what constitutes an article is to ask yourself if an element makes sense by itself, if it's on its own. If it doesn't make sense by itself, that means it can be grouped under the same article. So an example of an article is an individual news piece or blog articles. Then we have sections, just like how we imagine if we have to draw sections on our in our books, in our pages, it's the same way we can use sections in articles. So a section, how it's different from an article, is it groups elements that serve some purpose. For example, a section containing news articles or a section for blog posts. A section is usually marked with a heading of what to expect. Now you could also have sections inside articles, but it all depends on what content you have and how you think it would be semantically appropriate, because everything should make sense. We have an aside, like you've seen before in the previous example. Sorry, that was a nav. I'll show you the aside later. It's coming up. The aside is a piece of content that is usually moved to the side of the page, and by aside it's usually kept on the right side because the navigation bar on certain occasions come to the left side. Also, the navigation sometimes comes to the right side depending on what kind of device you're using, but an aside is usually placed besides your main section or other sections of a web page. I'll show you the example. Now what it's used for is to display secondary content. It's not content that's directly related to the web page. Content like popular posts, glossary, adverts, other links, all that comes under the aside. And finally we have a form. Sometimes in a website you will see an input field with a submit button, maybe type in your email. So those kind of elements can all be grouped under a form element. Other than these article section, aside, main sections, areas, the form actually contains certain attributes that give it the function of a form. But we can talk about that later. So some of these elements that the form can contain is an input field, labels, radio buttons, checkboxes, and text areas. So let's check some of these examples out. So here's an example of how we lay out our website. We have a main section. Let's just call different areas instead of sections so that we don't get confused. Alright, so we have a main area. Inside the main area, we have two other areas. We have a section and an aside. We talked about aside before. So the aside section will contain stuff that isn't directly related to the main content of the web page. So we have an aside with a form element and a division to put some more content inside. Okay. So then we have a section within an article. We have articles inside this section. We have a section and two articles inside, right? Now you can have sections inside articles, or you can even have articles inside sections. So here's an example of what that looks like. We have a section, and inside that we have two articles. An article has a section. You see, so how you use your sections and articles are entirely dependent on what content you have and how you want to structure it. Here are two more examples. We have a body. In the body we have a main, and we have separate sections. So this could be the main content. This could be maybe projects. This could be about. You could have another one called contact, Then on the side we have an aside. Here's another example. You have a main section, and inside that you just have articles. Each article has a division. This is kind of like a structure you could imagine for a blog website. You just have each article is just a different blog post, right? Finally, we'll talk about some non-semantic grouping elements. Now, everything we discussed before was a semantic element, but sometimes when you want to group some elements together, it doesn't have a semantic tag. an appropriate semantic tag for it. So what do? That's why HTML gives us the div and the span tags. Now the div is used just to simply group some items where semantic tags may not be appropriate. Sometimes in order to target certain elements together with CSS and or JavaScript, you would need to group them, but there isn't a semantic tag that's exactly appropriate. So in those cases, we can use the div tag. It's also the most commonly used tag across web development. Now, div is a block level element like all the other elements we talked about earlier, meaning it takes up the entire width of a page and pushes the next element to the next line. Then we have the span tag. The span is also a non-semantic tag, but it's an inline tag. You had seen several inline tags like emphasis, strong, anchor, abbreviation, code. You had seen these tags before in previous lessons, but sometimes you want to target certain parts of a text where none of these inline semantic elements would actually fit. So let's say there was a text and I just wanted to turn one word to gray color. Now there isn't exactly a semantic tag for this, so I would wrap that word inside semantic tags, and in CSS I would just make that part gray. So that's an example of how we can use a span tag. It's used when no other semantic tag would make sense to use, right? Finally, we have a horizontal rule. This you've seen in the previous lesson. It just draws a line across the page. It's basically used to denote a change in content or a change in theme. It's used to demarcate one section from another, one paragraph from another. It's basically a line. Then finally, we have the line break. Now, it's used to move content to the next line. But if you want to separate text into different lines inside an element, let's say a paragraph, at specific points, you can use the line break. But there's another question now. Why not just use separate paragraphs? Because first of all, that would be semantically wrong. So in the case of a postal address or a poem, instead of putting each line in a different paragraph, semantically that's incorrect, right? So you can put the entire postal address or a poem inside a paragraph, and wherever you want to break the line, you use the BR tag. Anyway, that's it for all semantic and non-semantic sectioning, area, grouping elements. One thing to note is that all these elements that we discussed they all have to be displayed inside the body tag. Just remember. Now let's just see, look at a simple example of these layouts. Let's see how we can structure them in our HTML document. Okay, let's take a look at this. Snap this to the side. We'll take a look at this one. Alright, so this is back into our website. Okay, so what I'm going to do for this one now is, oh yeah guys, if there's something you don't know by now, I'm sorry if I haven't told you this before, but you can comment out an entire block of code in your code editor by using Control/. What this does is it wraps the entire code in these tags in an angle bracket, exclamation point, dash dash, with a closing bracket, with a closing tag called dash dash, angle bracket. What this does is it makes all your block of code non-executable. It just turns this entire thing into a comment. This is called commenting. So now instead of deleting this whole thing, I can actually keep it in my HTML file, but this part won't exactly render. So what I can do is I can control save this, and you'll see that now everything is gone because all the code is just a comment, and comments are not displayed on the browser. Okay, so I'm just going to do that, and let's create this example. Let's take the first example. I think we've done this before. So we have a body tag. So what we do is we create a header tag. Inside the header, we can create a navigation, right? And then we have the main tag, and then we have the footer. So this is one example. Now the other example is to have the navigation tag entirely outside the header. So that works like this. We have navigation and we have header, right? So we have, this is the second example: header, navigation, main, and footer. Let's take a look at the next one. All right, this is kind of like the same thing, like this example that we have here. The only difference is this has actually been styled with CSS. That's why you can align it to the side. But if I render this saying header, and I say nav, and I say main, and I say footer, if I render this to the page, you'll see that it all goes one below each other. So if you want to align elements like this, you would have to be using CSS to do it. So this is just an example of that. So here's what the other example looks like. So we have the main, right? So inside the main, the first example, we had a section and we had an aside. Those are the two immediate children of the main. So we had a section, right? And then we had an aside, right? Once again, inside the section, we had two articles. Now I'm using an extension of this code, of Visual Studio Code, that lets me do this. So inside the section, there are two articles. Inside the aside, there was a form tag and a div tag. Sorry, not div, div. So this was an example of the main, section, aside, form, and div. Now if I add these things inside here, if I just add content inside here, like I said before, this will not look right now like it does in the image. That's because we haven't used any CSS to align our items. So I'll show you what that looks like. Right now you'll just see every element displaying just one after the other. Okay, we have a header first, then we have a navigation, then we have a main. Inside the main, actually, we have a section and we have an article. Okay, then we have an aside. Okay, and then we have a form and a division. Finally, the footer. But it doesn't present itself like I've shown you in here, right? So the same way, we can do the same thing for the section. Section inside article. Article has another section and a div, right? Here's another example where we can just remove all this from inside the main. You know, we can remove all that from inside the main, and we can have another section inside. You can say section with section 1, and another one that says section with section 2, right? So that's what that looks like. And you can also have an aside. Again, could have an aside, but like I said, this doesn't render the way we want to, like in the picture. That's because we have to use CSS, right? Now I'll show you an example of the line break and horizontal rule. I've shown you the horizontal rule in the last lesson, but I'll give you an example of span, horizontal span and break. Let's go inside our main content. We'll remove that. Okay, and we'll add a paragraph in here, and we'll say lorem. Okay, it does this every time. You toggle word wrap. Okay, so now suppose I just want to make this part of the text in red color, okay, for some reason, but it doesn't have any emphasis, it doesn't have any strong, that's not semantically correct. I just want to turn this into a red color. How can I do that? First of all, let's just render this and see what that looks like. Right, so we have header, and then we have the paragraph. So let's turn this part, let's turn this part red. How can I do that? First of all, I'm gonna have to use CSS, but I need to use the span tag to target that part. Okay, so I save this, and then I create another file in my styles. In my styles, I target the span tag, and I say span, and then I say color red. If I save this, you can see it turns red. So this is how I can access certain parts of the text, right? So if I want, I could come in here and say maybe font size, let's say 30 pixels. You can see, grown big. So the same way, let's see how I can, how to use the horizontal rule. So after the navigation, let me add a horizontal rule. Okay. After the main, let me add a horizontal rule. Do that after section as well. So save that. You'll see a horizontal line across the page. Right? Now let me show you what the line break tag is for. Let's say this is a poem. Okay? Let's say this is a poem and I want to put some of these lines, some of these sentences, I want to put these sentences into separate lines. Now you think it would make sense to actually, let's remove this span tag first of all. You would think I should just make another paragraph tag and cut this and put this in that paragraph. Control X, paste it in here. You get it? Control X, paste that in another paragraph. You get what I mean? And maybe this into another paragraph. Okay, now this actually isn't the right way to do stuff. So let's see how this displays. You see it displays like this, with each sentence actually posing as a separate paragraph, but a paragraph is supposed to contain all, is supposed to say that all sentences are related. This way it doesn't do that. So what we can do is use the span tag, the line break tag. So let's say this first sentence over here, we can say BR. Okay, we can do that for another sentence. We can say line break again, and let's add another line break here. Okay. Now if you see that, this is a poem that contains, this is all in one paragraph, but each sentence can be placed on separate lines using a break line, break line, break line, and here. So that we use 3 break lines to create a poem that makes sense. Alright, that's it for today's video. I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.